Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday Melt segment with the 2MK team. Hopefully, if sound is fine, we are playing Melty Blood as always. That is what Tuesdays are for. And this game has received changes recently, as you can already see. On account of the doll-sized crazy being on the screen. But you should probably respect her as she is the most powerful being in the Nasuverse by a large margin. And so, we must learn to understand and respect her capacities. Fortunately, she has chosen to fight fair and bring herself down to the level of the rest of us, for the most part. Just don't make her too mad, and everything should be fine. Most of the changes in this game have been to combo routes and specific things that happen in neutral. So you can definitely play the game mostly the way you played it before. Just specific different things happen when you are in particular positions in neutral, and some characters that were less powerful before may have gained some things by the increase in speed, changes to health, though not much, or general movement in neutral being better? Let's go with better. So far, Neko Arc's main weakness, if you could say that she has one, because, you know, she doesn't have any real ones, but if there were to be something you could speak of as if there were a weakness, it would be that she does not seem to be terribly strong in the air at the moment. Which makes this matchup not necessarily hard, but complicated at least, because there's a lot to learn about handling Ciel, who can basically just stay up there and change her vectors quite a lot. A lot of the time your better option would be just to get further away and use her various I-beams and other things to keep a massive amount of control of the space you've got. Literally being able to blast beams out of your eyes at your opponent from across the screen is a pretty easy way to handle someone like Ciel, who is often moving. But this is a problem because the moment she realizes that's what your game plan is, she will start to play more neutral again. Making it the usual back and forth that we get when facing one of Rune Siren's characters. A constant change between should I be defending or attacking. One thing that is definitely true, for the most part, is that unless your Oki is quite good, you don't really want to be that close to her on wake up. But because Ciel doesn't necessarily cross the screen really quickly, despite having the option to throw things, certain knockdowns allow you to use Neko Arc's 2-2A, which is extremely powerful, but only when you have enough time to use it. In certain cases, you actually want to use her down B from the air just to get to the ground faster to set this off, particularly when dealing with Ciel's various high-flying business. That particular situation just now, for example, when Ciel is very high in the air, she does have a limitation in which vectors of attack she can use. In those cases, you can usually backdash and just 2-2A and wait. But of course, in any situation such as that, your opponent can always use some form of shield to save themselves from any craziness that you are throwing out. So understand that the purpose of this is not necessarily to get control of the match, but to put her where you want her to be on the screen in a different way. Our lounge has reached the maximum number of team members we expect to see today, so we have 2 more spaces if you would like to jump in. This is our NA lounge, which of course means that you would probably have a good connection if you are in the east of the United States. Midwest is iffy because you might not have good connection to everyone. But if you have good internet connection and live basically anywhere near to the Atlantic Ocean, you can probably give it a shot. Aoko got very slightly more health. When we say very slightly more health though, we mean 300 health. And in this game that's not very meaningful because as you can see, though CL's keys got nerfed somewhat, they're still in 1900 damage. So if you were looking out for the idea that, they've given characters different health, this will have a meaning. It has a meaning only at very high levels of play in a specific situation. It's quite literally, do I have to hit you with 4 combos or 3 to kill you? Some characters were put in a situation where they could probably, if the only thing you did to them was do your biggest combo, they will live 1 combo longer. Technically it's 1 stray hit longer because they'll be left with nearly no health. But the reason this is not generally important in Melty Blood is because a lot of the extra health you're getting has a lot more to do with when you've chosen to do your health recovery than how much health you started the match with. But at extremely high levels, where the only thing you really have to think about is, am I being comboed or not? It can make some difference. It can put you in a space where instead of being dead, you could now get control back and therefore use the same blood heat and, strictly speaking, recover even more health. So it's not meaningless, it's just complicated to think about, as the numbers in difference are quite small. Even Koma, who now has the highest health in the game, technically only has around 600 more health than the average member of the cast, and that's basically 1 kick. In fact, one of the most important ways you would ever notice it is in the amount of damage done to someone when you've shielded their attack and gone for the shield counter, whichever shield counter. But as you can easily see, things like actual moves do way more damage than that. This is still somewhat in line with how many other games actually work, but not quite. Again, the actual part of the interaction matters a lot more than the specific value. So if it doesn't feel like your character is much more durable, but you heard, hey, there were health changes, that's mostly why. Depending on what's going on, you're not going to get much out of it, and as combos have improved across the board, I'm not really sure how much effect this will have on the actual highest levels of play. It might be more so something to help you through the mid-game while you're trying to catch up to the high-level players. After all, as we always say, minimizing the damage you take and recognizing when you can learn something from a match, even though you are losing quite badly, is pretty important. There were very few full nerfs to pretty much anything other than the shield mechanic itself, so you don't really have to worry about characters having issues. Whatever you were able to do before, you can probably still do. My character has more or less gotten all of the combo routes that I thought she was supposed to originally have. So this is, whether or not the character herself is heavily buffed, I am fairly heavily buffed. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to practice a single one of these combos. But this doesn't necessarily matter, which is an interesting thing that comes up in games like this for me quite a lot. Of course, given the opponent I'm facing, this may not be terribly helpful. As I noticed on the last stream, you can't actually go through most of the black keys as often as I would definitely prefer to myself. And other than that, therefore, it's a chase down game most of the time. Similarly, if you are chasing someone and mistime your approaches, you often die in a different way than you might expect to. The answer is normally to bait players quite heavily. But this is a little rough on both me and my opponent, as it tends to lead to a situation that they don't like, and that I really hate playing, so I'll just keep attacking and probably just keep losing. If you wanted to play this matchup more correctly, particularly the way this character is now, your better bet is probably to not move very much. Because Ciel covers so many spaces in general, but your better bet is to try to make her think that something is about to happen, and then manage to shield. But you have to be right about it every time.
ここはいやり直しです。
そらほら目も当てられない。
慎みなさい。
熱い。
燃えて見えすいていてよ。倒れて巻きつけ。私からここでテイクも慎みなさい。お願い慎みなさい。
耐えてくれよ。
慎みなさい。
熱い。
落ち着いて。あら
ほらよ。どう
それ巻き上がれ。休ませない。うっとうしい KO をやってくれたわね。
もうちょいと楽しませてくれよ。
結構なお手前でした。ファイト。
ぬるいね。
下ですカウンター。慎みなさい。
熱い。
燃え鋭くてよ。
いいん
ここテイクも
お分か
燃えてありえません。
目も当てられない。お分か
汚してくれたわね。またやるじゃない。
死に払ってほらさっさ
覚悟はできているようね。
やれやれ、一度しかない命。
オープンユアマジックサーキット。ファイトカウンター。
ビバビーノ
汚してくれたわね。このロー
ほらよ。
やるじゃない。
ほらよ。
何ですか。せーの。や畳それ。や
ここかと。
それこれなら巻き上がれ。や
ほらよ。
テイクも汚してくれ。慎みなさい。汚して音を。
ほらよ。
カウンター危な。巻き上がり巻きまえなさい。カウンターこれならや休め。どう命知らずね。そこや巻きこれで諦めて。何ですか単調でそれ。
息苦しい。
テイクこれならや捕まえたわ。
たまんねえな。
ほどきなさい。降りないの全く。降りなや落ちなさい。
耐えてくれよ。
慎みなさい。
暴力賛成。
あらなんで
ほらよ。息苦しい。
どれが
やり
や
ほらよ。いいもんだな、動かせる体ってのは。
ここからは遠慮はなしでファイト。うっとうしい調子に乗りすぎよ。巻きつけ。これなら正しくしなさい。私から動かないで。
ちょいと言ってな。
汚して
ほらよ。
これならこれなら体罰です。
ここかと。
カウンター私から動きなさい。
ここ本気ってやつだ。
汚して目障りにも程があって
見切った。下で
そこせーのここからです。巻きつけ。私慎みなさい。慎みなさい。
遅い。いいな。
慎みなさい。
熱い。
落ち着いてやこれなら
バラす。
本番です。
遅い。
ローでは慎みなさい。落ち着いて懲りない。行きます。落ち着いて
ビバビ
慎みなさい。行かせません。私から
やります。
止まってこれならお願い。そこテイタル行きます。
やり
やっ
下
ユーウィン。
ですね。 まったく人生とやらは素晴らしいな。
オープンユアマジックサーキット。
セク
ファイト。おやすみ。リーダー。
ほらよ遅い。セクシャ
ペイタ。
ほらよ
カウンター。
ほらよ
Alright, we're now back to full power chaos. I took a break as there was nothing in particular about the last match that pertained to the new stuff. It would have just been discussing slightly changes in Roa's ranges, which I guess count as nerfs, but if you played Roa a specific way to begin with, it really didn't matter. But it does matter against Neko Arc specifically. Because if you feel as if your opponent is going to approach in order to get their spacing right, she has a lot of good options there. Be confusing on other people's wake up by putting out different options is a useful aspect of her play as a generality now, but it does just more or less encourage your opponent to defend. Knowing exactly how much you can get done based on the amount of time it takes your opponent to, for example, fall, whether or not they will even be able to tech in the first place, and assuming that they do such a thing, which of your moves they will lose to, is another core aspect of playing this character as a totality. Defense is really helpful, obviously, but because she has a normal hitbox now and can't just be poked around in the same way, a lot of what you're caring about is how much time you have to do specific things while your opponent is away from you or being knocked down. This isn't necessarily because you're looking to get Oki on everything, but simply that once you've got them down, you can play neutral in a different way than you would before. Her relatively otherwise weak neutral is so incredibly well covered by all of the things she could do otherwise, combined with using exactly that, that it's difficult to make sure from the perspective of the player facing off with the thing that you know what she's actually doing. For example, a situation like that where you're literally being attacked from behind. This means that generally the instant air dash from the opponent is one of your biggest concerns in any aspect of the matchup. Once they're in that range, you generally want to be looking out for it. But because her moves don't target that space terribly well, at least the ones with better startup don't, she's fairly susceptible, except, of course, hitting 3C, which everyone just has better versions of now. I would say you should go for Neko Arc Chaos, but that's technically a different character. this player is back. That's great. Because their defense is literally rock solid.
いいぞ簡潔に済ませよう
It does slow them down a bit in terms of payoffs in core gameplay, but against Roa this might be really interesting because Roa now has less capacity to reach with certain moves.
俺の番
That said, they're a really good person to test stuff against because they don't tend to do a lot of damage as a result of their relatively defensive playstyle. When they do get a hit, it's not overwhelming. And if you have new setups of your own that you want to check out, you probably will be able to. In fact, if you use your blood heat even partially to restore your health, after you do get hit, you just basically get to spend a lot of time checking out your combos and seeing what parts of your neutral actually are effective, because you can generally assume that if you messed up your neutral trickery, this player will just stop you. And when I say having good defense, I also mean what you just saw. Knowing, okay, it's time to rush in on you and do offense things. Not necessarily because the offense is some overwhelming new trickery that they are going to throw out, but simply because they know, okay, I should just hit you. I should just hit you as fast as I can because you're not thinking in that way right now. The easiest way to think of a player like this when they're doing the thing you're seeing now is that they're never going to do anything that's intended to trick you. Whatever you see happening on the screen is what is actually happening. If they jump at you, anti-air or shield. If they rush at you, shield or dodge, or uppercut. It's not that their offense is weak, it's that they're not playing offense to begin with. They're just defending by hitting buttons. And that's a very important skill to have. And it's a really hard thing for many people to get used to at the beginning of these games, to grasp the idea that your opponent is striking not necessarily because they expect to hit to get good damage to beat you up. They're striking so that you don't. And the reaction to this can be meaningfully different. The main thing you generally want to try to keep in mind, psychologically at least, is the person has not become a direct threat just because they have started doing moves instead of blocking. The direct threat comes when you can't tell which of the two things is about to happen. The specifics of what exactly is happening when they are hitting buttons are not as important as you deciding are they about to hit buttons or not. Because if you think they are, and spend a lot of time like trying to beat it with your own or looking for defensive situations and you're wrong, you're often going to leave yourself open in some way. But if similarly you thought that they were going to stay still but ended up rushing in or trying to get a hit on them quickly, she is fast, she has good rushes, and she will do this to you. Fortunately, she has built-in options for making this more effective. Just being able to go for the left-right mix-up alone makes this style of play more effective as a whole. But you see demonstrated by OmniRabbit here, it's just thinking, okay, that's how that combo works, that's how that string works. But chances are that the player hasn't necessarily learned a bunch of overwhelming, complicated ones, so I'm just going to defend the same way that you defend this normally. You can learn these things if you understand what safety is in most games. People who do moves with the express purpose of making sure the move they're doing is the safest possible move, the move that has the least chance of getting them killed, just because they've done it. Crazy offense players tend to do a lot more stuff that leaves them, as we say, negative, and this leads to bigger problems because, on both sides that is, if you hit with this thing, it's usually very damaging or very confusing or frustrating, and the player facing it is just thinking to themselves, why did you do that? That's such an unsafe move, such a bad idea to do. But the thing that's happening is they did it because they thought you were going to not be expecting it. That, for example, was a good tricking jump, and that was a good neutral jump for the same sort of spacing. Even that uppercut was more so mistimed than, let's say, the rabbit got tricked into uppercutting when it wasn't correct. It was almost certainly, oh, I'm not so used to the movement that goes with this. That was probably not managing to uppercut in time. Or maybe controller death? I would believe controller death. Another thing that's very important when you face this sort of player is to spend even more time thinking about whether or not you have a better punish for that standardized combo or standardized defense that they do. Where can you maximize damage based on some other aspect of your play that other players with stronger offense or crazy ideas don't give you time to think about? Is this a reset check? Apparently it was, but it didn't quite work. That was a hit. It was an okay hit. Normally I tell players like this to work on their offense because it is the reason they're losing. But there's always going to be some reason you're losing. So you should generally play to your strength and work on whatever small modifications to that you can manage to do based on your general mental style. Alright then, Neko Arc Mirror. This one I understand. Because we have recently had Neko Arc tournaments. And it leads to the weirdest thing, because quite simply, as you've just seen demonstrated, whoever gets into the air first basically has the better options. But this is still very similar in one way. Once you are in the air, once you have got your opponent on the defense because you're in the air, your goal shouldn't actually be to open them up or kill them. Because getting into the air and actually getting big damage off of it seems relatively difficult, particularly at round start. Even when it's like second round start. So often your goal is to get into the air, figure out what your options from there are, and even when you get knocked down, your opponent is likely to be trying to do some setup. But if you got countered from full screen with it, you didn't care. There you see the demonstration of why you want to end your air combos with 2B. You getting down faster is basically, once again, an advantage to you. It is for this reason that her super jump is one of the best moves she has. In order to super jump, you simply hit down up. And getting to your opponent that quickly is really useful because she jumps so far and most of what Neko Art does goes in front. Not all of it, certainly, but most of it does. You can also use it to evade when you're in this situation, as opposed to actually bothering to try to get your opponent into other worse situations. But I won't necessarily say it's a good idea to do because it doesn't really avoid as many things in that scenario. She's another one of those characters who has so much effort and time put into starting her moves though, that you can get to the position on screen you want very easily. You cannot necessarily counter-attack her very easily because that's not the point. The character would be terrible if you could just get to the other side of her and beat her up all the time. The thing you're trying to do is to get to where you want to be almost all of the time, and the super jump is your second main way of doing that. Simply shielding and using the BC shield is obviously also a good option, but since shielding is now differently effective and follow-ups are a little bit harder to get, most characters care about this, but not necessarily Neko Arc herself, because when she's put you in a weird situation, she is still doing what most zoning, confusing style characters need to do, still working on figuring out a way to make you think too hard, basically, and get yourself hit. The super jump also makes it much more difficult to lose because of what you just saw, losing track of the opponent's position. After all, if your opponent is attempting to confuse you with things on the screen, just move your own position as much as you possibly can. The fall of the controller. That's probably fine. Alright, all clear again. Archway doesn't have the best options here, as she does have to cross the screen a lot, and therefore won't be easily able to get in without actually... You can see my opponent knows this, they immediately just go there. case, I believe that was technically bad luck, because you can't always tell when that's going to happen, and that enemy is the one you're going to end up facing. Ooh, that was not what I thought it was. Okay. Since she can generally negate a bunch of the head-on attacks that Archwade normally wants to use, this becomes among your best options. And this move does enough damage so that most of the time you're probably going to get something. But it's not necessarily a move you can just throw out whenever you want either. So your main benefit most of the time is the fact that your opponent can't necessarily just do whatever they want if you put that space in front of them. But you do have to worry about the fact that you have no invincibility on specific things in the first place. There is exactly this position where I should have done the thing I was talking about. Just put the space in front of you in hopes that you get the knockdown of your opponent's position more so than anything else. I messed up the super jump. That one's misleading, for example. The main reason this works for certain definitions of works is simply that Neko Arc isn't terribly effective at attacking Archwade when she's in that specific spot on the screen. It's not that the character is bad in any way, but you can't attack as easily from there. And the amount of time it takes to cross that spot is considerably lower when you're just hitting forward moon. So, given that you're facing off with a character who will be able to escape from you pretty easily, don't let them get away. It's a little short. I never end up learning the range of that move because every time I use it in those situations it gets more complicated. I don't appreciate her summons. At the end of the day though, she is supposed to be this character where you can't tell exactly what's going to happen and you must react very quickly. So it's very important to understand exactly what all your options for doing that are. Okay. I thought I was invincible on startup. Guess not. I couldn't trust the forwards moon, so here we are. One move I will nearly never get to use is the pouncing one. The character isn't necessarily too small to be hit by it, she just won't ever be in the spot where it's a good idea. Ooh, perfectly delayed. And that was a super jump moment. Alright, we're on to MASH. But I probably don't have a lot to say here. This character is relatively straightforward, and it's more about understanding her combo theory than any specific thing. She's a very footsie heavy character, I guess you could put it that way. But it's more so that she's good enough at doing things off of her other moves and advances well enough in footsies when she wants to, that the main thing you're concerned with is how far away was I when I landed this hit, and therefore how much damage can I get, or what position on the screen will I be putting my opponent in once I'm done. As you can see, her move type, she's not really one of those characters where you can really easily freeform flow all of your combos. She has quite good combos, but they're relatively linear / limited. You pretty much know what you must do whenever you land a hit. See? Or situations like that will happen. If your opponent is not in the space she's about to rush into, when she's using her more powerful moves, they're just not going to get hit at all and you can't really solve it. She also benefits quite a bit from the super jump, but nearly everyone does in this matchup. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that that means something as a core concept of how to play her. In fact, the more time you spend in the air, the less likely it is that you're going to get the sort of hit you want for a good starter. Fortunately, her defense is quite good, and her ability to surprise people from defensive positions is also quite good. So you don't necessarily have to worry about it too much. But you do have to pay a lot of attention to those ranges. Whenever you land a hit, pay attention to what range you are at. Because the other problem that comes up is exactly as you're seeing now. If you can't do that, all that meter she tends to build up and is technically supposed to use to help with those combos just sits there and doesn't really help you. I wouldn't say she's necessarily a meter heavy character in terms of doing proper things with the meter all of the time. But if you're not paying any attention, it's a little bit hard. And then, of course, you end up on stream and don't even know how much meter you have. Yes, I suppose that's my main form of advice. If you don't know where she is on screen, just super jump. Because the super jump often, for many characters and at many timings, will take you out of the range of even her beams. And she must do a different one that wouldn't hit you if you stood still. And as always, if you can add even the slightest bit of thinking and stress to your opponent, you're more likely to be able to win.
Open your magic circuit. Fight. Win.
Technically, Powered CL is at disadvantage as she has too few moves that reach full, absolutely full screen quickly enough. And reaching absolutely full screen is important because otherwise Neko Art can just hang out there, in neutral anyway, and not care. So once again, super jump, super important. She is explicitly a footsies character, and while that doesn't mean she can't deal with someone just being as far away from her as possible, she's certainly not as good at it as Unpowered Seal. She also at least has a lot of good ways of advancing, but basically you don't really have a way to stop Neko Art from just getting out of the way and then setting up too many cats on screen. It's even to her benefit to throw you further away with whatever move she's doing. Because you can't play footsies with this character and expect much to happen in your favor. Because she plays this footsie style play, she often tends to be aiming at a specific spot on screen, even though it looks like her moves cover a lot of space, making it even easier for Neko Art to do specific things in the air, but you generally don't want to. Again, you mostly just want to hang out over here and throw out clones to set up situations you want. There are a few things more frustrating / stressful to a footsie character than having more forms on screen that aren't the real target. Because this type of player is trained to respond literally subconsciously to spacings and appearances of opponents. Meaning that if they have more of them on screen that aren't the main one, now they have to think a lot more, and even some of the best players, at least in other games, tend to deal with this in some very interesting, if not strange, ways. Combine this with the fact that Neko Art literally has a moon move that functionally teleports her right to you. Things get really complicated for CL players, for powered CL players, really fast. One of her main options, therefore, is that whenever she does land a hit, just use Meteor on something. Since getting the opponent into the right position takes so long anyway, you're better off just getting big damage whenever you can. What exactly that means for you might be different, but it's certainly important to consider. Well, this has been, as it generally is, extremely intense. And it means we've come basically to the end of the stream for the night. The lounge is unlikely to close anytime soon. I just have to remember that it times out. And not go AFK. Or rather, poke it occasionally. I'm not sure that it is in fact going to open up any slots too soon, but we can certainly check around, because often at least one of us heads out. We were holding off on making bots for this game because of exactly the same thing you're seeing here in terms of development. It just kept on feeling as if there was quote-unquote supposed to be one more patch that changed the game relatively radically, because the way it was built, we could see it being fun, but it would eventually lose long-term appeal, and that's usually a problem. Exactly which thing was going to be changed was unclear, but it just did keep on feeling as if, okay, they're gonna do something, right? It might not be something we like, it might not be something we even understand, but the things we are seeing are not the things we're expecting yet. But now that it's done, it means we can put more effort into working on the bots for this game, as a generality. And I'll try to start with those that are unlikely to be drastically changed by any follow-up fixes that they want to do. Bots for games in general can be found at 2-mk.org, and information on whether or not we are streaming on any given day and when we are releasing bots on our Twitter 2_mk_FGC. You can probably join us tomorrow for Wednesday Night in Birth, but I can't be sure of that. You should be able to be sure of both Feeling Thursday and our Angel Bot release in our Disc Guidance segment on Friday. But this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.